Hey everybody, Trey here, back with an updated forecast discussion on our multi-day severe weather threat expected to begin tonight across parts of the central and southern plains, move into the mid-south and southeast tomorrow, and into the eastern seaboard region on Wednesday. Lots of colors you see on the SPC outlooks. It is starting to get to that time of year as we approach spring. But let's go ahead and go day by day here. Starting with our day one outlook, and this is mostly going to be for tonight into the overnight hours tomorrow morning. So much of the day today going to be nice and clear out there across the central and southern plains. Storms will not begin to initiate until later this evening into the overnight hours Tuesday morning. But the SPC has just recently upgraded this risk to an enhanced risk, level 3 out of 5, in the orange shaded region you see here. So that is going to include Oklahoma City, Norman, Lawton, Fort Sill, Ardmore, Wichita Falls, right down into the northern and northwestern portions of the Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex. You are right on the line there between the level 2 and level 3 out of 5 risks. Really doesn't matter. I would take this just as seriously if you are in the yellow shaded region as if you are in the orange shaded region, as this is going to be a nighttime severe threat, after dark, low visibility, complex storm mode. So going to be very difficult to spot these storms. So anyone in especially the yellow and orange regions here need to be on alert tonight. Have those weather radios handy this evening into the overnight hours tomorrow morning. But the reason for the enhanced risk upgrade has been an increase in confidence in the overall tornado risk tonight. It has now been upped to a 10% risk in the yellow shaded region you see there, and with a 2 and 5% region extending basically from the Oklahoma-Kansas border, the 5%, down into the kind of west central Texas region, including Abilene, and up toward the Kansas-Oklahoma border. And then 2% goes all the way down into central Texas and southeast Kansas, including Wichita. So large tornado risk for this evening. Confidence, again, has increased in the threat for tornadoes with this initial round of storms tonight. As has the damaging wind threat. We now have a 30% risk in the red shaded region there. So damaging winds, tornadoes possible, and large hail, at least in the early portion of the convective life cycle. Again, complex storm mode. We'll talk about that here in just a second. But so mostly a tornado and damaging wind risk, but large hail could be a concern with the initial storms as they fire tonight. Then we go into tomorrow. Day 2 outlook has now been expanded. The SPC has now expanded the enhanced risk level 3 out of 5 all the way back into southeast Oklahoma and northeast Texas. So the orange shaded region here, very expansive enhanced risk. That's going to include, again, Texarkana, Shreveport, Alexandria, Jackson, Greenville, up toward Little Rock, Mobile, Alabama. You are in the enhanced risk for this particular setup, with a large slight risk extending all the way up to the Missouri-Arkansas border, eastern Oklahoma, including Tulsa, Dallas-Fort Worth, Lufkin, New Orleans, Dothan, Birmingham. You are in the slight risk level 2 out of 5, with a marginal risk extending around that. Tornado risk is going to be elevated once again tomorrow. 10% hashed risk for tornadoes in the yellow stippled region here. So Shreveport, Alexandria, Jackson, Mobile, you're in the 10% hashed. Again, this has been expanded in recent updates given some new data that's come in. So the threat for a strong tornado or two does exist and will be maximized in this corridor of the yellow stippled region there. 10% extends all the way back into southeast Oklahoma and northeast Texas for the line as it moves into these areas Tuesday morning, with a broad 5 and 2% risk surrounding that. Damaging wind also could be significant in that corridor from the northern half of Louisiana, southern Arkansas, into much of central and southern Mississippi. Large hail, not going to be much of a threat tomorrow, mostly going to be a damaging wind and tornado risk. All right, then we move into Wednesday. Slight risk now for the areas from basically far southern Pennsylvania down all the way across the eastern seaboard into Georgia, the Carolinas, Virginia, Washington, D.C. You are all in the slight risk level 2 out of 5. Likely to see these outlook lines shift as we get some more data in here. They're about to do another update just a couple hours after I'm recording this video. So we'll see how they shift the outlook lines, but the potential for all severe hazards is in place, especially within the yellow shaded region here on Wednesday. So lots to cover in this event. Let's go ahead and dive in. Before we go into the severe threat, I want to talk about the fire weather risk as well. Extreme fire weather conditions in the pink hatched region here. So West Texas, eastern New Mexico. You are under the gun for an extreme fire weather risk today, as very strong winds will accompany the backside of our severe weather making system today, with lots of fuels, and that drought in this region definitely is widespread. So definitely need to be very careful out there today. Fire weather could be a concern going into today with those strong winds. But let's go ahead and take a look at our severe threat here. We'll start off with our SPC mesoanalysis at 500 millibars, and right away you see what is going to be the cause of our severe weather over the coming days. It's this big old trough out across the western half of the country right now. Very strong winds rounding the base of this trough, 110 plus knot winds rounding the base of that trough within the jet streak. Very potent trough here. As we often see during the wintertime, the winter months, very potent trough, and it is going to continue to amplify and strengthen and move off to the east over the next few days. And really, the timing of this is why we're going to see mostly an overnight threat tonight. The forcing is not going to overspread the region here out across Oklahoma, Kansas, Texas until late this evening into the overnight hours. So things are going to hold off for much of the day. The forcing is not timed well enough for us to have daytime convection, but overnight that trough is going to move in. We'll have plenty of forcing to initiate storms with this trough. It will continue to take a little bit of a positive tilt nature to this trough right now, but it will take on a much more negative tilt as it goes into the evening hours tomorrow for our Tuesday setup. We've already started to see some pretty significant flow start to traverse the Rockies there in the mid and upper levels of the atmosphere, so it's not surprising that we've seen a pretty robust surface cyclone develop out here across the eastern portions of Colorado. It's somewhat broad at this point, not a very tight, compact cyclone by any means, but a very broad, deepening cyclone at this point. Strong pressure gradient out to the east of that. You see the pressure lines here, the isobars, very close together across the plains, leading to some strong winds, and also down here in that fire weather risk region, very strong winds there with the tight pressure gradient with those fuels in place. Very dangerous fire weather setup there, but very strong winds across the plains, and this surface low will continue to deepen as that trough really starts to move to the east, and we start to get that stronger flow to continue to traverse the Rockies. We're going to see that surface cyclone deepen over the next several hours, and that will be our kind of surface feature moving into the next several days for our severe weather threat. As we go to 850 millibars, low-level jet is in place across the region. Again, that will continue to increase as we go into the nighttime hours tonight. We have that, of course, that diurnal cycle with the low-level jet that tends to take place. It tends to ramp up as we go at and after sunset. Plus, we'll have the deepening cyclone out here to the west to really strengthen those low-level winds. And so we're going to have very strong wind fields across the region, especially in the low levels, which is providing a little bit of extra support for that tornado risk. Can't rule out a strong tornado or two tonight as well. I know the SPC did not have a hatched region for this area, Oklahoma and Texas tonight, but with as much as the low-level jet is expected to ramp up, there could be an isolated chance for a strong tornado or two, and then the strong tornado threat will continue into the day tomorrow, Tuesday, as that low-level jet will be very strong in a persistent fashion out across the mid-south and southeast. All right, let's take a look at some surface data here. Here's our raw surface data, most recent update. We already have pretty robust moisture across the region. We talked about this a couple days ago in our first forecast discussion on this event, but that initial wave that caused that severe weather across southwest Oklahoma yesterday, that allowed for some low-level cyclone development, at least some initial low-level cyclone development, which started the moisture transport process and the moisture advection process quite early with this setup. So we already have 60s dew points all the way up to the Red River here, basically even into southern Oklahoma and areas to the south. That is where our most robust moisture is at this time. It is expected to continue to make its way off to the north as we go into the afternoon and evening tonight. Not going to be a super really rich low-level moist air mass. These 70s dew points models not really showing the real rich moisture making it all the way up here. But we do have that strengthening surface low, so we do expect to get at least some 60s, low to mid 60s dew points up into Oklahoma and even potentially closer to the Kansas-Oklahoma border by tonight's initiation of storms. So that will kind of cover. That's why we've seen an increase in confidence in this overnight threat tonight into tomorrow morning, as the moisture return is expected to be at least decent, at least seasonably decent for this time of year out across these regions. So that is basically our current surface data. Let's go ahead and take a look at some of our soundings here. We don't have any updated afternoon soundings yet, but we can take a look at least the quality of the moisture here. So this is at Corpus Christi this morning at 12Z, so 6 a.m. Central Standard Time. Fairly deep moisture here. You see 72 over 67. Again, this is our much deeper moisture, which is situated down across South Texas. Areas to the north, maybe not quite as robust at the surface, but the overall moist layer here in the low levels is fairly deep, up to about 850 millibars. So fairly robust low-level moisture, at least in a quantity and quality perspective there with how deep it is. We do see that is beneath a pretty stout capping inversion, so we're, again, not going to have enough forcing from the trough during the day to initiate storms across these regions, but as that trough moves in, this cap will really quickly erode. Moisture will be moving north, and so we'll have plenty of ingredients to support severe weather tonight. Dallas-Fort Worth this morning, again, we were kind of in somewhat of a cloudy air mass here, saturated low-level air mass, so some low-level clouds there likely this morning. But the moisture extends again up to about 850 millibars, so at least moderately deep moisture with this particular setup should provide plenty of fuel for the storms to work off of this evening. All right, let's take a look at some model data. 12Z NAM here. So here's our trough, 500 millibar trough centered out here over the kind of Intermountain West, Great Basin region. That will continue to move off to the east as we go through the evening hours tonight. You see it is kind of more of a positively tilted trough here. Here's your base of the jet streak there, base of the ski jump, if you will. Axis goes right through that from the center of the trough, so a nice positively tilted trough. So again, we would expect to see the forcing kind of still lagging back here. This is at 6 p.m. tonight. But as we go into the evening hours, we're going to really start to see that trough move through. Those stronger winds are going to start to really impinge across this region of western Oklahoma into western North Texas, and that's when we should see storms start to initiate late this evening, probably after 9 to 10 p.m. at the very earliest, but more likely closer to the midnight time frame, and then they will rapidly expand in coverage and intensity going into the early morning hours on Tuesday. But very kinematically driven system here, very strong kinematics. And then as we go into tomorrow, the trough takes on a very negative, much more of a negative tilt here. You see the center of the trough down through the axis, much more of a negative tilt here. Strong winds impinging upon the exit region of this trough. And so we should see a nice persistence of the storms into the day tomorrow. It's not going to be one of these setups where we have storms overnight in Oklahoma and Texas. They dissipate, and then we get a new round of storms tomorrow across the southeast. Because of the timing of the forcing is going to be moving with the convective complex going into tomorrow. We're going to see that convective complex continue to remain robust as we go into the morning hours tomorrow, and especially into the afternoon, as we get a reinvigoration of instability out across Louisiana and Mississippi and Arkansas, to allow for some more, perhaps a re-intensification of the line, but that line again will be fairly continuous going into the afternoon tomorrow. Then we go into Wednesday. The trough continues to move off to the east, very potent trough, strong flow impinging upon the eastern seaboard there. It is starting to become a little bit less compact, broaden out a little bit as we go into the day on Wednesday, but still plenty of forcing within the broad exit region of this trough here. All this area going to be under the gun with ample forcing for ascent to allow those storms to continue and perhaps redevelop out there across the eastern seaboard on Wednesday. Let's go down to the surface here. All right, surface map. So you can see that surface cyclone developing there across eastern Colorado. Very tight surface cyclone. Tight in terms of how it's deepening. It is a very broad surface cyclone here out across these areas, but it will continue to deepen into the nighttime hours tonight. And then as we go into the morning tomorrow, you see that moisture, that warm air mass, the yellows, oranges, and reds, extends all the way up into Kansas here, right up into the surface low tonight. So that's why the slight risk extends up into Kansas, expecting to see some risk for severe storms up there. Let me zoom into our Central Plains sector here. Actually, maybe our Southern Plains sector will be a little bit better. Yeah, so here we are, 6Z. This is about midnight tonight, surface low there in western Kansas. And we have a very well-defined cold front, very well-defined temperature gradient there, temperatures in the 30s and 40s behind it, temperatures in the 60s ahead of it. It is a fairly narrow warm sector with northward extent, kind of a triangular shape to the warm sector there. So with northward extent, the real estate for severe weather is definitely not as high as it is down to the south, where we have a very broad area of warm, moist air there extending from West Texas all the way into the southeast. But still, very strong cold front here. Moisture will be advecting pretty rapidly to the north through the evening and nighttime hours tonight. And so that will allow for those storms to probably initiate along this cold front. That forcing very strong aloft, and the shear vectors are going to be very parallel to this initiating boundary, this cold front here. So you see our cold front there and our shear vectors very much parallel, very parallel to the actual initiating boundary, which is the cold front. Couple that with the extremely strong forcing from this kinematic, this impressive kinematics with the trough. That is going to allow for rapid transition to more of a squall line and MCS here. So very, very, very short window for supercells, it looks like here. There is some, at least short window, so that's why the large hail threat exists out here across western Oklahoma and west Texas, western North Texas, but the storms will quickly transition into a line, producing damaging winds and the chance for tornadoes as we go into the nighttime hours tonight. That cold front, as we talked about, will continue to push off to the east going into tomorrow. Really, so this is kind of an interesting evolution here. So we have really just one main boundary right in here, which is our cold front out across the southern plains tonight. But watch what happens as we go into the day tomorrow. We kind of get this lead cold front / dry line, whatever you want to call it, out here across the southeast. You see the pressure tongue here. That will be basically what the cold front is tonight. It will move off to the east, kind of as almost a Pacific front / dry line, not a very big temperature gradient across the front anymore. So it'll be acting more so as a Pacific front / dry line. And then an actual synoptic cold front will be back in here. You see the very strong temperature gradient back in here out across the southern high plains into the central plains. That might be our new synoptic cold front, but our initiating boundary for storms in this setup will be that initial cold front tonight, which will transition into more of a Pacific front / dry line tomorrow, moving across the mid-south and southeast. So very interesting, unique evolution to the surface pattern going into the day tomorrow. So that will continue to move off. You see that pressure tongue there. That will be our ongoing convective line. We'll take a look here in a second at the chances for any prefrontal development out here in front of that line. But that surface low will continue to move off to the east. I'll zoom back out to the CONUS sector, and you see how it deepens pretty rapidly going into the morning on Wednesday. Very deep surface low here. Your pressure approaching 980 millibars. That's kind of, if we were to talk in hurricane characteristics, obviously hurricane strength does not correlate at all to mid-latitude cyclone strength, but just as kind of a comparison, 980 millibars is kind of in that category 1 range for hurricanes. So very, very deep, rapidly deepening surface low, moving up into the Great Lakes. Very strong winds accompanying the surface low. You see the pressure gradient is very, very strong, very tightly spaced isobars here across the Great Lakes. So that could lead to some issues up there with any ship travel on the Great Lakes. But as we move on in time, that frontal boundary will move off into the East Coast region. You see the pressure tongue right in there, and that will be our boundary along which the storms are oriented on Wednesday. All right, moisture. Let's go ahead and take a look at our moisture. I'll zoom back into our southern plains sector. So once again, starting this morning, we are seeing those 60s dew points basically all the way up to the Red River at this point, and that is the case that the NAM has shown. Maybe a little bit ahead of schedule, actually, for what the models were showing. Some of the models, the NAM decently on point here with 60s all the way up to the Red River, but we are already starting to see pretty rapid northward advance of this moisture. You see, though, by this evening, this is 3Z, 6Z, not a ton of further northward advance of those 60s up into Kansas. Warm sector are certainly very narrow. The red contours are your lifted index contours, which basically indicates instability. They do extend up into Kansas, but again, it's a very narrow warm sector up there. This is at midnight tonight. And then with southern extent, very much broader warm sector ahead of that cold front. So here's your cold front boundary out in here, very tight moisture gradient there as well. And then as we move, so storms will initiate along this boundary, western Oklahoma into northwest Texas by late tonight into early tomorrow morning, and then they will continue to move off to the east. The warm sector kind of gets pinched off with northward extent. Oklahoma City along in this NAM run, kind of the northward extent of those 60s dew points. So, but down to the south, 62, 64 dew points there across North Texas. So that will be a concern as the complex moves off to the east going into tomorrow morning. Then we go into tomorrow afternoon, and that has kind of been the main event with this setup for the last several days, at least what we've been watching. But we've had a significant change in the warm sector over the last several days, as we talked about in our previous video, and even further change going into this model run compared to just the model run a couple days ago that we looked at in our initial forecast discussion on this event. If we go back to that 12Z run on the NAM, looks like the COD does not have that. Let's see, 0Z maybe. So it looks like COD does not have a great archive here for their data. But so here is the morning run yesterday, and then today's morning run shifted back to the west a little bit. Let me look on Pivotal here real quick. I just want to give you an idea of how things have changed with this setup over the last several runs. So let's go ahead and take a look at the low-level moisture here, southern U.S., and then we will go and see that. All right, so let's go to 12Z tomorrow, so that's going to be 24 hours from now. So this is the current run of the NAM valid at 12Z tomorrow. Or at least let's go to 18Z, how about? So 18Z tomorrow, kind of pinched warm sector there into the Arklatex region. This was a few days ago, so let's go to March 1st. So 2 days ago, 12Z run of the NAM. You see a much broader northward extent, and even this was much more pinched off than what we were seeing, 4, 5, 6 days ago on the model runs. It used to have a very broad warm sector, and that was not the case on our run here a couple days ago. You see this kind of triangular shaped warm sector, very pinched with northward extent. It has gotten even more pinched with northward extent as we have gone into the latest model runs. This is today's model run. You can see the difference there. Much more pinched off warm sector here out across this region. A little bit shifted back to the west as well. Arklatex region, a little bit of that remnant warm sector there. Still somewhat of a broad warm sector down to the south, but it is still somewhat narrow. So very drastic changes in the overall geometry of the warm sector over the last several days. 21Z tomorrow, 3 p.m. Central, and then 0Z, and you see that warm sector continues to just get more and more narrow with time here. The extent of those red contours, your unstable air mass, not all that wide here. Maybe central to Louisiana to southern Mississippi, and that's about it going into the evening tomorrow. So not a lot of real estate here to support robust prefrontal supercells here. Again, always have to watch for prefrontal supercells here. So main frontal boundary right in there, your Pacific front / dry line, which was the initial cold front. We do notice this little, perhaps a band here in the open warm sector that appeared to me initially to be somewhat of what was actually our dry line / Pacific front, but it might actually be back in here, with this potentially being a confluence band. So if we can get enough real estate here, especially along the Gulf Coast where forcing is a little bit weaker, forcing, again, very, very strong. Even going into tomorrow, you see just lots of forcing, lots of meridional flow, north-south flow within the exit region of this trough, where we have a little bit more westerly component to the flow and a little bit more of a glancing blow out here across the Mississippi and Louisiana Gulf Coast region. That's where we could see the greatest potential for maybe an isolated supercell or two out ahead of the band. But this band will be moving very, very quickly. Once again, this complex will continue into the afternoon tomorrow from tonight. And so that is going to be a solid band of storms. But we do have some potential just out ahead of it for maybe a prefrontal supercell or two, and that would have the greatest potential for an isolated strong tornado risk. So that is going into tomorrow, and then let me zoom back out here. Actually, before we do that, we talked a couple days ago about the secondary target with this setup, which was right along the actual surface low up here, and the NAM has actually shifted it quite a bit farther south. Your surface low here along the Kansas-Missouri border there in southeast Kansas, southwest Missouri, and then the moisture kind of feeds up into that there, and you see some instability with that. That could be a secondary place to look. Eastern Kansas into western Missouri as the low moves off to the east. Could be a place to look for maybe some isolated storms with especially a large hail threat, maybe an outside chance of a tornado or two. This is a little bit of a wonky kind of cold core type setup here. As you can see, so here's our 500 millibar, center of the 500 millibar trough up in here. The surface low is right in here, so that checks the box. Surface low very much in close proximity to the center of the 500 millibar low. Cold air aloft with the 500 millibar closed low as well. Those grays, very cold air aloft, minus 25, 26, 27 degrees Celsius. So very cold air aloft, but it's very weird. Your moisture is kind of feeding in almost on the back side of the surface low mostly, which is very unusual. So it's a little bit wonky. Shear profiles up here very, very weak as well. Let me take a sounding up in here kind of by the Bentonville, Arkansas area as well. And you just see very classic thermo profile for cold core events with very fat cape scrunched into the lowest few kilometers of the atmosphere, strong low-level instability. But your wind profile is definitely on a little wonky. Usually you see at least some curvature there in the low levels, not seeing much of that at all. And your upper level winds back significantly out of the south, giving you right up underneath that 500 millibar closed low. So a little bit on the wonky side, definitely not a perfect type setup. This is closer to Bentonville, Arkansas. We see a little bit more low-level curvature there in the hodograph. Again, these are more driven off of the surface vorticity. So I still think there could be an isolated tornado risk up in this region. The NAM certainly farther south than what it was a couple days ago. A couple days ago, we were looking more in the Kansas City area. Now has it more down in the southeast Kansas to northeast Oklahoma, northwest Arkansas, southwest Missouri area. But overall, just a little on the wonky side, but certainly thermodynamics are favorable for some cold core supercell threat up in there with very strong low-level instability. So we'll have to watch that for sure. Again, the main threat's certainly going to be down across the southeast, but looks to be mostly a QLCS threat. And then we go into the next day. That moisture axis will continue to move off to the east. Interesting here, we kind of lose the Gulf moisture supply with northward extent. You see those 60s dew points relegated down into the closer to the coast there. We kind of see this this belt of moisture moving in off the Atlantic, which is somewhat unusual, but you see that some of that Atlantic moisture moving in. And then we kind of see a reinvigoration of the moisture field out here across the eastern seaboard. Destabilization occurs, and we get a continuation of the severe threat into the East Coast on Wednesday. So let's go back here. I want to take a few forecast soundings across the warm sector in these scenarios. So let's go ahead midnight tonight. We'll take a look here out across western Oklahoma. Kind of get an idea what the environment is going to look like tonight as storms, just after storms are going to initiate. And this is why the confidence has increased in overall a tornado risk tonight. We have robust instability, 1,800 joules per kilogram mixed layer cape there, fairly fat instability profiles there. A little bit of an inversion there in the low levels, but it certainly doesn't look like something that would really inhibit surface-based convective development, especially when we have such strong low-level shear. You see the hodograph here on the right, very strong curvature in the low levels of the hodograph, with very strong effective storm relative felicity in excess of 300 meters squared per second squared. So, as we've talked about before, when you have strong low-level shear, that can help actually add buoyancy to the atmosphere further than what we see with our CAPE measurement to allow for surface-based storms, even with a little bit of capping inversion in place. Classic example of this was the Greensburg, Kansas EF5 back on May 4th, 2007. Pretty stout cap in the low levels, but you had such strong low-level shear that it didn't really matter. Another great example was February 26, 2023, here in the Norman area. We had that EF2 tornado. Very strong cap and warm nose there, much stronger than what this was showing, but you had almost 1,000 meters squared per second squared effective storm relative felicity, which helped overcome that and produce a significant tornado despite the cap. So with this little capping and this much low-level shear, I expect we're going to see pretty much surface-based development all across the cold front as those storms initiate. But this would certainly be an environment favorable for tornadoes within the line. Perhaps, again, even an isolated strong tornado or two. Storm mode should preclude a much more robust strong tornado risk, given that it's going to be more of an MCS, but still QLCS circulations can be strong, and with this much shear in place, would not be surprised to see a strong tornado or two. How about the ability for the QLCS to produce tornadoes? We like to look at our low-level shear vectors. 0 to 3 kilometer shear vectors is a good one to look at, and its orientation with the line. So our cold front's going to look something like that. Pretty decent perpendicularity with respect to the orientation of the MCS, and that is more favorable for some spin-up tornadoes within the line. So Oklahoma City, Norman, Lawton, Ardmore, Wichita Falls definitely need to be on alert tonight for some spin-up tornadoes that could be on the stronger side as the line moves through. Again, overnight hours tonight, mostly late tonight, overnight hours into Tuesday morning. So have those weather radios handy, especially if you live in those areas. Even Dallas-Fort Worth moving into tomorrow morning certainly could have that issue as well. Moving on into the morning hours tomorrow, this is why the SPC has extended the enhanced risk back into the Arklatex region. We will still be seeing a warm sector across this area with strong low-level and deep layer shear. So that line will continue to remain potent, strong enough instability, about 1,000 joules per kilogram mixed layer cape, with somewhat wonky hodographs there. but plenty of low-level shear to support some spin-ups within the line as well, with plenty of instability. So that QLCS tornado and damaging wind risk will continue into the morning tomorrow. And then again, that line is going to be our main focus for tomorrow's severe threat as well, as it moves into Arkansas and Louisiana, especially down here in Louisiana, where the warm sector is wider. Up here out across Arkansas, very pinched off warm sector once again, so that's going to lead to a somewhat more minimal threat up there. Still threat for some isolated severe hazards up there, but down here across Louisiana, moving into Mississippi with time, that is where our most robust threat is going to be. Enough instability to support that threat. A little bit of weirdness there in the low levels of the hodograph, a little bit of a warm nose there on the NAM, and some fairly saturated low levels. So fairly limited low-level instability, but enough deep layer instability to support robust updrafts continuing within the line, and enough low-level shear to support a tornado risk there. Some veering and strengthening of the winds with height, over 200 meters squared per second squared effective storm relative helicity. And again, if any storms can fire ahead of the line, which I think is a somewhat unlikely scenario, but if any supercells can form ahead of the line, they would be able to best tap into this environment to support that tornado risk, perhaps a strong tornado risk. But one thing to note here is most of your low-level jet, which was not the case a couple days ago, but most of your low-level jet, I'll draw in our warm sector here, somewhat like that. And then if we look at our low-level jet, a lot of it is confined into the eastern portions of the warm sector. So your line is going to be more along the actual boundary, a little bit less low-level shear along the line, still plenty to support spin-up tornadoes. But out here, again, if any supercells can fire ahead of the line, down here in southern Louisiana and southern Mississippi, moving in off the Gulf, where the forcing is a bit weaker, winds aloft are more westerly, that is where we could see a more robust risk for a strong tornado or two, especially going into the afternoon and evening hours tomorrow. There you can see why that's the case. Again, somewhat weird low levels there, somewhat saturated low-level thermodynamics there, but overall enough instability, over 1,000 joules per kilogram mixed layer CAPE, to support robust updrafts, and extremely strong low-level shear. Look at that hodograph, just an impressive hodograph, almost 900 meters squared per second squared effective storm relative helicity, with lots of streamwise vorticity. So that is why we're watching closely for prefrontal supercells. The saving grace here is the lackluster width of the warm sector, and perhaps some of those wonky low-level thermos. And so not a very high confidence scenario that anything will form here across southern Louisiana, moving into southern Mississippi with time. But if anything does, that could be a very potent risk, and those storms would have the best chance to support strong tornadoes before the line overtakes them going into Tuesday evening. Moving on into Tuesday evening, into early Wednesday morning, threat moves across Mississippi and Alabama. The line will continue to be potent, most likely, sounding across Alabama midnight, going from Tuesday into Wednesday. Your wind profile is definitely a little wonky there, which is a good sign. Looks like your low-level jet might be a little bit off to the east as well there. So that line may start to lose a little steam, perhaps especially with tornado intensity, tornado production there, with very limited low-level shear across Alabama going into the nighttime hours, Tuesday into Wednesday. And then we get into Wednesday across the Eastern Seaboard. That low-level jet maintains itself, very broad low-level jet, a strong low-level jet across those East Coast states going into Wednesday afternoon. And so as that moisture comes in off the Atlantic and helps reinvigorate the environment there, should have very strong low-level wind profiles out across these regions. Here's one. We'll take one in Virginia, maybe one in North Carolina as well. Not the most robust moisture by any means, just low 60s dew points into the upper 50s, but certainly enough to support a robust severe threat. Perhaps more low-topped in nature. You see all that instability kind of packed in the lowest few kilometers of the atmosphere, about 700 joules per kilogram mixed layer CAPE. Again, this is in northern Virginia there, northeast Virginia. But that wind profile certainly would favor tornadic supercells with strong low-level shear, strong veering and strengthening of the winds with height, nearly 300 meters squared per second squared, effective storm relative helicity. So that certainly would favor perhaps some tornadic activity there. Farther to the south, a little bit weirder low-level hodograph, but certainly enough low-level shear to support tornadic activity. Instability a little bit weaker down there out across North Carolina, but we're still a couple days out, and it's the NAM model, so could be just model quirk, and I would expect and prepare for this as if everybody here from far southern Pennsylvania all the way down into Georgia under the gun with enough instability and strong deep layer and low-level shear to support a tornado risk, both with any storms within the remaining convective line or any new storms that develop in a supercellular fashion out here across the Carolinas, Virginia, into Maryland, Washington D.C., and vicinity on Wednesday afternoon. So let's take a look here at a couple of convection-allowing models here just to get a sense of what might happen at least tonight into tomorrow. They don't really go out toward Wednesday, at least in with any confidence. So we'll just focus on tonight into tomorrow here. So this is the 12Z HRRR run. You see through the day, nothing much happens at all. And then very quickly by about 4 to 5Z, so 10 to 11 p.m., storms rapidly develop along that cold front. Very quick transition to more of a line out here across Kansas into western Oklahoma. The line continues to kind of fill in as we go forward in time there. Pretty solid line down there all the way into west central Texas. Again, plenty of chance for spin-ups within this line, perhaps an isolated strong one or two. And we go into Tuesday morning, so tomorrow morning, 6 a.m., that line moving through the Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex and into eastern Oklahoma, again, continuing to pose that damaging wind and tornado risk. Then we move off, and that, again, will be most of our threat for tomorrow. You see quite a bit of convection out here ahead of the actual line. I don't suspect that this will be very robust in nature. A lot of kind of showery activity, not a lot of strong activity. So this could be associated with a lot of cloud cover and showers here with some stronger convective elements within that. But if we can see any more robust cells down here across southern Louisiana and Mississippi ahead of the line that you see here, those would have the greatest threat to produce strong tornadoes there. And then we move into the evening hours. Definitely more of a broken line down here. So that is one other thing to mention. If we have more of a solid line continuing out here across these areas with more westerly flow aloft, that's going to mean your shear vectors are a little bit more perpendicular to the actual initiating boundary. So we could see a devolvement into perhaps a little bit more of a broken supercell type deal down here, and that would be quite dangerous. Again, that's conditional, but definitely something to watch as we go into the afternoon and evening hours tomorrow. And the HRRR definitely shows a little bit more solid line north where the shear vectors are more parallel to the boundary, and then down here a little bit more of a broken supercell mode, especially coming in off the Gulf. There are multiple little beams you see out there, so that would be something to watch, and if that can take place, that would maximize the tornado and strong tornado risk with those supercells. But it is just one model, something we're just going to have to watch as we go into the afternoon tomorrow, and then the line moves off into Mississippi and Alabama going into the overnight hours in a fairly solid fashion. All right, WRF ARW. Just another cam we like to look at here. So this is tonight. Storms fire pretty rapidly there, 5 to 6Z. Fill in very quickly within the line. Could be some embedded supercells in here as well. So again, Oklahoma City, Wichita Falls, Lawton need to be on alert there tonight. Moving through the DFW Metroplex by tomorrow morning, 5, 6 a.m. So that morning commute could get a little nasty around DFW tomorrow. Some stronger updrafts there within the line moving into eastern Oklahoma, Arkansas, Arklatex by tomorrow morning. Then that line continues. So this is interesting as well. The ARW is pinpointing perhaps a little bit more supercellular activity out here, out across southern Louisiana and southern Mississippi, with more of a solid line to the north. So we'll have to watch that very, very closely. If the thermodynamics are favorable enough, then we could see those supercells become robust. And in that environment that kinematic environment we showed you, that would certainly be a dangerous scenario for some strong tornadoes there. And that maintains itself. This model actually really maintains that supercellular mode a little bit longer down across southern Mississippi and Alabama, going into the evening hours there and nighttime hours, Tuesday night into early Wednesday morning. So very interesting solutions there. Let's take a look at our last cam, the NSSL WRF model. And so once again, storms fire. NSSL WRF a little bit off here compared to the other models. Doesn't have much developing until about 9Z, but the overall idea is the same. Quick transition to a line. Then we move off to the east, and then you see here once again more of a solid line across the northern half of Mississippi and Alabama, Arkansas, into Louisiana. And then down here, more of a broken supercell mode with kind of individual beams within the line and perhaps just out ahead of the line. So very interesting solution. That might be why the SPC has increased tornado probabilities out here, out across this region, Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama. So that needs to be watched very closely. If that line does devolve into discrete supercells or discrete supercells form just out ahead of the line, they would have that maximum risk for strong tornadic activity. So that is going to wrap things up for this video. Very complex setup over the next several days. Again, beginning tonight, late tonight, perhaps as early as 9 to 10 p.m., perhaps closer to midnight. Storms firing in there in western Oklahoma into west central Texas. Enhanced risk level 3 out of 5 in the orange region there. Oklahoma City, Norman, Lawton, Ardmore, Wichita Falls, over toward the DFW Metroplex. Need to be on alert for damaging winds and tornadoes tonight within the convective line. It will be linear, so damaging winds going to be the main threat, but certainly is an elevated risk for a few spin-up tornadoes, perhaps an isolated strong spin-up within the squall line across these areas. So keep those weather radios handy, as this again will be an overnight threat tonight into early tomorrow morning. The line will continue to march off to the east tomorrow, out across the Arklatex, the mid-south, as more of a solid squall line, more of a damaging wind threat there. But down here, out across these areas of kind of southern Louisiana, southern Mississippi, southern Alabama, that is where the best threat for perhaps a devolvement into more discrete supercells could occur, which would maximize the significant tornado risk given the very strong low-level shear that is in play out across those regions. And then as we go into tomorrow, these outlook lines will be shifted here with the next outlook, which comes at about 2:30 Central. But for now, level 2 out of 5, slight risk, enough instability and strong low-level and deep layer shear to support some supercells and organized convection out here with a tornado and damaging wind risk all the way from far southern Pennsylvania down through Washington, D.C., eastern Virginia, Carolinas, down into Georgia, going into the day on Wednesday. So very complex, multi-day threat with a very potent storm system that is moving in. So again, especially tonight into tomorrow and tomorrow night as well, have those weather radios handy. Much of this activity will be after dark when you are sleeping, so have those weather radios handy, have multiple ways of receiving warnings, and have a severe weather plan to enact quickly if you are put under a severe weather warning. But other than that, that is what we have now. This is probably going to be the last discussion video I do on this setup because of its kind of continuous nature going from tonight into tomorrow and Wednesday. I'll have updates on my social media feeds, X, Facebook, and here on YouTube, community posts as needed as things change with this setup. But for now, that's going to be the forecast, and everybody stay safe out there. So with that, thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.